Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Tim Palmer. Coming up today, how the federal government plans to change the culture of the Defence Force. Grand vision or grand folly? We look at the National Broadband Network. And later, the opposition's Malcolm Turnbull joins us for his view on that. Our panel tonight, business strategist and political author Phil Senior, ABC economics correspondent Stephen Long, and futurist and technology commentator Mark Pesce. Welcome to The Drum. Well, first, the federal government has taken wide-ranging action to tackle the perceived culture of chauvinism in the Australian Defence Force. Defence Minister Stephen Smith has announced a series of inquiries in the wake of the webcam sex scandal involving the cadets at the Academy in Canberra. There'll be an independent probe into the handling of the Skype incident, headed by military law expert Andrew Kirkham QC. And the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Elizabeth Broderick, will investigate the treatment of women at ADFA.
The Chief of the Defence Force, the Vice Chief of the Defence Force, the Secretary of the Department and the service chiefs themselves are absolutely committed to appropriate conduct by Australian Defence Force personnel, and there is a zero tolerance for adverse conduct. We need to ensure that everything that we are currently doing is effective, but also learn whether there's more that we can do, and that is the essential rationale for involving the Sex Discrimination Commissioner. We'll also take the opportunity of learning from other institutions in Australian society who have had comparable problems, whether it's the AFL or the NRL.
The head of the Defence Force Academy, Bruce Kafer, has been told to go on leave. The Chief of Defence says that's for his sake as well as the department's.
In these circumstances, it's very stressful for Commodore Kafer and his family. He has been subject to abusive and offensive phone calls and the like, and the environment is such that it is important that he go on leave.
Air Chief Marshal Houston will also fast-track plans allowing women to take part in all combat roles. So, Phil Senior, very soon the Sex Discrimination Commissioner will be poring over the Defence's work practices. They've been told to accelerate the pace at which women get a whole range of new roles, including potentially combat roles. If, as some say, there is a boys' club within the ADF, how will that club like this?
Yeah, look, I can't imagine that they're going to like it. As you say, given the ambit of the different reviews that we heard outlined today, it's going to shine a light on a lot of different issues in defence, around the culture around bullying, around the treatment of women, also around some of the transparency issues. So I can't imagine it's going to do anything other than ruffle a lot of feathers. That said, I think it clearly needs to happen. I think one thing that everyone seems to agree on is that there has been and is a problem in defence around the underlying culture in terms of aspects around bullying and treatment of women, but perhaps even beyond that to around then the way defence actually handles these issues when they emerge, whether there is perhaps the transparency and accountability that there needs to be. And even if that's just a perception that the community has that there isn't that transparency, that in itself is a problem. People need to believe that these things are being handled appropriately and professionally. And
away from the webcam inquiry, which was expected, how broad a commission, if you like, has the Sex Discrimination Commissioner got?
Well, to this point, it's not actually clear, but if you took the sort of on the widest reading of what we heard today, it does suggest that there's scope for her to make recommendations right the way across the Defence Force in terms of the way it treats women, in terms of the positions they rise to, in terms of what they are and aren't allowed to do, etc., etc. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because it's easy for us all to say there's a cultural problem, but what do you actually do about it? And I think one thing that we can be confident of is that you're only really going to change a perceived problem with the way women are treated in the Defence Forces when you have more women reaching the senior echelons of the Defence Forces and being able to influence the culture from there. And so hopefully the review will allow that scope for those sorts of recommendations.
Stephen Long, it's almost as if the Minister's taken advantage of a breach here to potentially create a seismic shift within the Defence Department, or won't it work out that way?
Well, it does look as if there is an attempt to impose some cultural change, and I think that it's long overdue. But I think it's a broader issue than just the Defence Force. Obviously, it has to be done there, but I attended a residential college at university for a while, and you can get certain aspects of boyish and masculine culture in those heavily male-dominated environments that can go over the top, be inappropriate, be threatening, and you need leadership from the top to make sure that that culture fits within acceptable parameters.
The relationship between a vice-chancellor and students at a university is well different, isn't it? Not between the relationship between the Defence Force, in this case, and the Defence Force Academy. There has to be a greater tie and greater responsibility.
Indeed there does, but what I'm arguing, I guess, is that you really need to have the discipline, the leadership coming from the top to set parameters and direction and make it very, very clear. And that, I think, we're getting a strong hint from the Minister that the feeling is that that is lacking.
The Minister talked about examples like the football organisations. I mean, both the AFL and the New South Wales Rugby League, or the National Rugby League, have had very strong leadership and outspoken leadership, and it's been very hard to see them breaking into the culture below. Is there something systemic within those tight-knit small male groups that is hard to break?
Probably that's true. And maybe making it a less male-dominated environment is part of the answer. And there is that discussion about opening up combat roles, changing the culture. I mean, I don't know a lot about the experience of countries, for instance, like Israel, where they have more of a presence of women, whether it's made a difference, but you just wonder if the Sex Discrimination Commission is involved and there is a radical revamp and women can actually play a far greater role, what difference it will make to the culture. Whilst it's a token presence, it probably won't make much difference.
Mike Pesce, one of the central characters here, the head of the Academy, Bruce Kafer, has been told to take leave. He'd already been subject to some pretty harsh comments from the Minister last week. Whatever happens in these inquiries, what's his future, do you think?
You can't imagine that he's managed to distinguish himself in this, and he's been, I think, consistently pushed to the side. I think the announcement today that he has specifically been put on leave is basically that he's been, I don't know if you can call it shamed, but he's been told that he's overstepped his authority, that he, by going after the victim, did something that was unacceptable in any culture, whether that's military culture or the common civil culture of Australia.
Is there potential political risk here, Phil Senior, for the Minister in not necessarily targeting someone like that, but someone like that being seen by the traditionalists in the defence, one of their own, having to take a step down? What are the risks for the Minister once this issue is dispensed with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two different aspects to it, because I think with the broader public, I don't think there's any political risk for Stephen Smith. I think he's on a winner. Obviously, that's not the reason he's doing it, but I've no doubt that pursuing this issue is politically popular because it's the right thing to do. But I think it does raise issues beyond this specific issue, because ultimately he has to have a cordial relationship with the top brass in the military in order to get anything done. And so I think we even saw a little bit of that today in the marathon press conference, him repositioning, if you like, to try and suggest that he and the senior defence leaders are actually perhaps on the same page more than we may have all thought 2 or 3 days ago. Now, I suspect they weren't on the same page 2 or 3 days ago. He's repositioning to try and make sure that the relationship doesn't become too dysfunctional. And that's fair enough, because at the end of the day, they're not going to get anything done without having them on side.
And could it come back to bite him later on an issue nothing to do with treatment of people at academies?
I mean, it certainly could. I mean, hopefully, I don't want to be too cynical, hopefully the Defence Force won't go out of their way to catch him up on another issue, but there's no doubt that there is the potential for that. And if there's a breakdown in the relationship between the Minister and the senior members of the Defence Force, there are any number of ways that could cause problems for him.
We've seen that happen before, of course.
Yeah.
In what sort of instances?
Well, I seem to recall a recent minister who didn't last too long.
There's plenty of...
Do you think that was a get square? There were suggestions at the time that there were get squares within
defence.
defence.
A lot of talk that I mean, it's a big issue, and there were certainly perhaps some issues of competency, but definitely talk there was a fair bit of get square.
It seems, though, from all of his public communications, that the Minister is making it very clear that he's not blaming the Defence Forces for this, and I think that's the opening that allows the change to happen without having him hung up for it.
Well, to another issue in Canberra, the powerful clubs industry has launched its $20 million campaign against poker machine reform. Print, radio and television ads have started running today. They sell the message that pre-commitment technology to limit problem gambling is an attack on punters' rights.
Licence to play the pokies the feds are talking about. That's a bit of a worry.
What?
You can't even put $10 in the pokies without getting a licence. And the government will be tracking what you win or lose.
The licence to have a punt, it's un-Australian.
Un-Australian, you wouldn't know it was a John Singleton campaign, would you? The ad blitz comes as the Federal Government Advisory Committee prepares to release its key recommendations in the coming weeks. The chairman is Andrew Wilkie, the independent member of Parliament who's made the reform a condition of his support for the Gillard government. He says low-value cards could be issued to occasional gamblers without the need for identification, and small bet machines could be exempt altogether from the crackdown.
People who want to play, serious gamblers who want to go on the high-intensity machines, they sign up to mandatory pre-commitment, they play those machines, they enjoy their game, but there's a safeguard on them so they don't start chasing the losses. And the overwhelming majority of players, the low-level gamblers, the occasional gamblers, they can either purchase the low-level card or they can use a low-intensity machine.
So, Mark Pesce, what do you make of the first shot from the clubs in that advertising campaign?
Well, they're definitely playing the fear, the paranoia card that the government wants to control everything. And in fact, what the government wants to do is it wants to step in and arrest an addictive behaviour, and that is the thing. And essentially what they're saying is, but how dare they take away my addiction? That's how they're playing it. And yet, if you step back and go, well, they're doing it because it's an addictive behavior, and we're doing what we can to put a circuit breaker in there. And hopefully that voice will then come out as the counterbalance to the argument that, yes, this is an intrusion against your personal liberties, but on the other hand, we're also preventing you from putting a financial gun to your head.
Well, is it much of an intrusion against your personal liberties? I mean, they talk about it as a licence to punt. I mean, just as an occasional punter, you can walk into a TAB without a licence as it stands. You can go to the racetrack without any card or an identification and place a bet. The one place where you can't go in without any identification is my local RSL club, or a club where you either need to have a member's card or sign in with a ticket, or you can't claim you're winning. So what would be the difference effectively from this card, from what you understand, Mark?
Well, I mean, I think the difference is that it basically puts a limit on the amount that you can wager for any particular evening if you go in, so that you can say, you pre-state you're going to wager $100 or $500 or whatever it is. And so then if you do get into a condition, which is Mr. Wilkie said, chasing your losses, you don't then continue to pump the machine with money in order to recover it.
That's what the issue is, though. But this ad campaign seems to happily skip the issue altogether. I mean, it's talking about a right to punt. It's not actually talking about poker machines at all, Stephen Long. Do you see it as sort of cleverly diverting the issue, or will it not work because people know what the issue is?
I'm not sure whether it'll work, but I see it as insidious and akin to the tobacco campaign against the restrictions on labelling of tobacco. I mean, I think that they're making false claims and trying to blow the dog whistle and appeal to a visceral emotional level when there's clearly a problem. The Productivity Commission, the bastion of economic rationalist thought, libertarian in general in its outlook, has come out and said that there needs to be controls in this industry, that we need this kind of pre-commitment and we need to sort of rein it in because there is an addictive culture. And I would go further and argue that there's something off in many ways about the whole way we've constructed the licensed club scenario, where they get massive exemptions and a leg up commercially with tax breaks and what have you, supposedly because they're providing a community service. I think it's highly questionable, and that this is
they do provide services, though. They sponsor local sports teams.
Yeah, they do, but
and the like.
How much of it, how much of that is a veneer over what they're really doing? And what they really are doing is pushing gambling, and I think it's pretty unhealthy, and that they really deserve to have it stuck right back to them.
Well, Phil, you're setting aside the rights and wrongs. Can this government withstand a $20 million well-organised campaign?
Well, actually, to be honest, on this issue, I suspect they can. I don't think this issue will galvanise the broader public against the government in the way that, say, the ads on the mining tax did.
Why is that?
Because I think the arguments that have been put forward by the panellists probably resonate with most people. Most people recognise that actually this isn't some fundamental impingement on their rights, and to the extent it is, it's being done for a greater good, which is that, there are a small number of problem gamblers who represent 40% of the total losses of the industry. So there's this sort of greater good, and I think people are prepared to wear a little bit of inconvenience if it's going to help other people. That might not be the view of everyone, but I just don't think this is going to really galvanise people against the government.
So to that extent, the club industry sees we've got a lot of members. We have a lot of people who are the recipients of